Here we go with YouTube. It says we're live. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. This is a global program we're doing today. I'm Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it is a real treat and an honor to have Iceland's First Lady, Eliza Reid, with us this afternoon. She'll be discussing her book, Secrets of the Sprakkar. Is that right? Sprakkar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And joining us is our good friend Yrsa Sigurdardottir. I told her I was going to blow that, but thanks so much, Yrsa. Always great to see you. And Barbara's tuning in from her home office, and I'm at my home office. And I'll be monitoring the Facebook comments feed and YouTube. So if you have questions for Eliza or Yrsa or Barbara, go ahead and put them in. And Barbara usually summons me towards the end of the hour, and I'll be happy to ask any questions you might have. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Wow, what an absolute thrill this is. And all the times I've been to Iceland, I have never had the privilege of meeting Eliza Reid, although Yrsa and I think have encountered each other. There's a wonderful crime conference called Iceland Noir, which meets, I think, in November, doesn't it?
Yes.
Which I've always wanted to go. So maybe this will be the prompt that will get us there this November. In any case, Eliza Reid has a fascinating story to tell. Part of it is an immigrant story. Part of it is a surprise foray into politics. And I thought, for those of you who don't know the political structure of Iceland, maybe Eliza would tell us why indeed she is called the First Lady of Iceland.
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to you and Patrick. Thank you for inviting me to do an appearance with you. As Yrsa knows well, I'm a huge fan of crime fiction, and I was extra honored that you asked me to make an appearance at the Poison Pen, even though my book is nonfiction and features no crimes or bodies. But yes, you were asking about what it means to be First Lady. In a nutshell, it's because I'm married to the president of the country. There isn't really a term quite the same in Icelandic. It's Forsetafru, or spouse of the president, or president's lady. But I suppose for people watching now, the salient details are the fact that in Iceland, we have a president who is elected, and we also have a prime minister. And the prime minister is the person who belongs to a political party and works with parliament to develop laws, whereas the president signs laws, but is otherwise more of a unifying figure for the country and not overtly political. And so as the spouse of the president, I'm not trying to put forth any specific political platform or be affiliated with any political party, but I am now more well-known in the country, and so I try to use my voice, and there's a lot of that messaging in this book.
That's really fascinating. So in a way, it's a role not totally dissimilar to that of Queen Elizabeth in England.
Yeah, and correct. Iceland got its independence from Denmark finally in 1944, and the role of the president then almost replaced, in a sense. There was a regent who represented the King of Denmark in Iceland, and then the president took over in that capacity. But it's an elected position at 4-year intervals.
So I don't want to steal Yrsa's thunder, because I know that she is doubtless meticulously and brilliantly prepared for this program. But I do have two things that fascinated me in reading Eliza's wonderful book, one of which she grew up on a hobby farm in Canada. And I have to say, that's the first time I've run across the term hobby farm. So what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you asked. That's maybe a very Canadian term. I'm not even sure. We always called it a hobby farm. In a sense, it means that it's in a rural area of the country. And my parents had livestock, sheep and chickens and ducks, but it was a hobby for them. It wasn't really their source of income. All of the money, I think, that they got from selling lamb meat and turkeys and chickens went back into the running of the farm. My father's a teacher. My mother stayed at home with us. So it's a hobby farm in the sense that there was livestock there. It's in the countryside next to working, professional farms, but it was just a hobby for them.
I love that. So Eliza went from Canada to Oxford by devious routes, or possibly even visible routes. And one thing I also loved about her story is that when she and her husband, I think I have this right, decided to move to Iceland together, that you went off on a trip of some months on your own, which I thought was a wonderful statement of independence, which kind of ties into your book. Where'd you go?
Mhm. Oh, thank you for asking that, because no one's asked that in a long time, but you're absolutely right. I love to travel, and I was moving to Iceland, and I thought, if I'm moving to a country and I don't speak the language and I don't have a job, I should also be broke and really just start from the beginning. So I took all my savings and I bought a ticket to Moscow, and then I took a sort of modified Trans-Siberian train, and I went into Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and then back up into Siberia and into Mongolia, and then into the Gobi Desert. And then I flew to Japan and to Singapore, because at the time the SARS virus, there was a pandemic going on, you couldn't get out of China. So I flew to Japan and then Singapore, and then up through Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. And then I flew back. And it was a wonderful trip, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who's considering doing something like that.
Wow. Well, I've done some of it, not all of it, but fascinating. Of course, Iceland is a small country. I am actually, in your honor, I couldn't find my Iceland coffee mug. I'm drinking mine from Lapland. This is why, and I can't read, unfortunately, the language. But anyway, a salute to all that from my little Finland semi cup. In fact, if my internet connection doesn't improve, I may even disappear. And leave this to you.
Great.
Okay. Eliza, and for those of you listening, I just maybe want to note that I'm not being rude when I use Eliza, the first name, because in Iceland everything is on a first name basis, and it would just seem completely odd to address someone using the last name. So anyway, I wanted to start, Eliza, by congratulating you on the book. It is such a great book. It's entertaining while being informative, and that's not an easy thing to accomplish, I think, because it never ever feels like homework, but you have such an important message. So did you decide that at the beginning, that you, like, how did you choose this topic for one, and also did you realize, and how did you realize that the best way of doing it would be to make it warm and somehow putting your own experience in it and making it personal in a way?
Well, I think, part of it was that the idea just occurred to me, that I thought it would be interesting to write a book, sort of paint a portrait of what it's like to live in, quote unquote, the world's best country for women. And I never wanted to write an academic book. I didn't want to write a history of the country. And part of it is laziness and pragmatism. I thought, if I'm telling the stories of interviewing people, then I need information and research to back up what they're saying, but I don't need to, spend years researching the theory behind something or do sort of academic studies. And I really wanted it to be an accessible book that people could relate to, that was just interesting, but because you're getting to know unique people and characters. And I knew that I always wanted, to a degree, my own story in there as a bit of a narrative thread, but also because then people can see the country through my eyes, because I'm an immigrant to Iceland. And so are the people who are reading this book. It's written obviously for people, primarily for people who live outside of the country and maybe don't know very much about it. And so they're sort of seeing it through my eyes. And then I suppose otherwise, this is all I knew how to do it. I thought, well, I'll write it. I hope that the tone is a bit like if someone is going out for a drink with me and just chatting with me. And I tried to write it in that sense. And I would conduct an interview with someone. And as soon as I was finished the interview, I would think, okay, if I were telling my friend right now that I just met this really interesting person, what's the first thing that I would say about that person? And that tended to be what I started with when I was introducing the different characters. So as you say, it really focuses, I hope, on the stories of these Sprakkar, these outstanding women in the book, and my own story. And then the facts and the information are there to back that up, but to back up any sort of anecdotal things that people are saying.
Well, you did a fantastic job, and it's warm and humorous and informative. Yeah. So, and I think that's not an easy thing to accomplish. And so just congratulations, Elsa. It's such a great read. And I think maybe because even though you said that you wrote it for the outside audience in a way, that maybe because your immigrant studies, it's also, I thought it was just as interesting for Icelandic women, because a book like this has never been written, I think.
No,
Sort
no.
of
I hope so.
mix up.
Yeah. I hope that it was a bit surprising as well, as you say, for Icelandic women. And the book came out in Icelandic before Christmas. So people here in Iceland have had a longer time to take a look at it. Yes, exactly. I think that what people here would find interesting is that, as you said, it highlights things that maybe people in Iceland have never thought about before, because it's so expected or common sense here. And I hope that the women I profiled maybe aren't always the obvious ones that people think of. Obviously, many of the women are well known within Iceland already, but certainly not all of them. And I deliberately tried to do that. And when it comes to the tone of the book, I suppose, again, I think gender equality is such an important issue, but sometimes it can be told perhaps with anger or aggression. And I want really more the story to be inspirational. I want people to get an appreciation for the fact that this is a subject that I think to everyone. It's not a women's subject. It's something that is of benefit to everybody. It's an objective that is not a zero-sum game. You know, we're not one group isn't benefiting at the expense of another group. And so I wanted to do it in a nice and hopefully inspirational way. And I also call this my love letter to Iceland, because I really wanted to introduce people to the country and the society of Iceland overall. So hopefully people will learn a lot about the country and its history and its nature and its people, aside from the theme of gender equality.
Absolutely. And you did also, like you were mentioning, the interviewees, that you did a really good job of getting a very broad spectrum of women from all walks of life. And I was wondering, like, because you don't jump for the obvious choices, because in a small country like Iceland, it's often always the same people being interviewed on certain topics, that you manage to avoid that, and you get such a broad perspective by doing this. How did you select these women? Did you have like a list and then cut it down, or how did you go about selecting the people you wanted to talk to?
It was kind of a mix. Everybody who I asked agreed to be interviewed. So, which I was very flattered by. And I guess I decided first the subject areas. And so, for instance, I thought, okay, I want to interview someone about politics, or I want to interview someone about sports or about the media. So I started with the areas, and then it was a mix of people maybe that I either knew and had a connection to because I wanted to tie it with this personal story of mine, or it was somebody who had an interesting story that got attention, like, for instance, Unnur Brá, the politician who was breastfeeding her baby in Parliament. And then otherwise, I also tried to fill gaps. So I thought, well, I need somebody else who's based in the countryside, or I'd like to have an older person now, or someone from a different part of the country. So I tried to fill it in so that it was diverse as it could be as well. And I tried, there's a chapter, for instance, on corporate women and the workplace. And I interviewed 3 different women there. And I deliberately tried to choose women who are working in the 3 different industries that are major to Iceland. So there's one story that comes from the tourism industry, one from the geothermal industry, and one from the fisheries industry. Also, just to give the representation of maybe the most common fields in which women might be working nowadays. Yeah. But, I could have written 10 other different books. I mean, there's so many people to choose from, of course.
Yeah, but it's, and I also, another thing that the book has, which is so positive, is that you somehow managed to address like all of the, reading it, at least as the reader, you get the feeling that you didn't miss anything. You have all of the...
I'm sure I did.
Yeah, like you're looking at it from all the right places in a way, or the places that matter, and you take... it's and I think that somehow adds that you get the full effect of what the Icelandic country is like for women, because you're looking at it from so many different perspectives, through so many different eyes, as well as your own. So, and I don't know how you had the time to write it, Eliza. You are the mother of 4 children that are not, grown up or anything. I mean, and you have a hectic schedule. You run the writer's retreat, which we might go into a little bit later. But how did you find the time to do this on top of everything else?
Well, a healthy coffee habit is, I would say, the number one thing. I drink a lot of coffee, which I never drank before I moved to Iceland. And, being organized. And again, the pandemic kind of changed things that we had to cancel the writer's retreat, which I spent a lot of time working on during those spring months and in 2020. And there were fewer commitments as First Lady. There was obviously no travel. We often are very traveling a lot. I do a lot of work doing Icelandic promotional events abroad. That was all canceled. So there was really, in that sense, a lot of those events were canceled for me, although the kids were also at home more. And I suppose, the plus side of my first book being a nonfiction book and writing this book is that I sold the book based on a book proposal, meaning, just a couple of chapters. And then you've got a signed contract and you have to deliver the manuscript. And I think it always helps to work, to deadlines.
Oh, yeah. It does. But I also, you were in academia and you were head girl. For Iceland, if you want to be known by a body part, that's the body part you want to be associated
Head of college.
with.
Yeah.
So it sounds like,
you're student politics
smart girl. Yeah. But could you tell us what that means? Because I don't think you have that in America either.
It's a position called head of college, which is sort of like head of the students' council at the college that I attended at the University of Toronto. So it was an elected position, and they had one woman and one man who did it. And you ran, you were in charge of you were the sort of student leader of the school. So helped allocate budgets to different clubs, make sure that they ran well, made sure that the parties went well, or helped to organize the orientation committee and sat on all kinds of admin boards and helped to choose academic dons and all sorts of things like that. And it was fun. It's the only election I've ever had to run in.
Yeah. So did you see your life as going into academia or?
No, I didn't. It's funny you ask. When I went to Oxford, which is where I did my master's degree, and I met my now husband who was doing his doctorate degree. I kind of went in to get my master's degree mostly because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So it was just sort of procrastinating to continue before I had to make any real decisions. But it was a graduate college at Oxford. So it was just master's and PhD students who were there. And so it was maybe split where the people doing their master's degrees were then going to go on and do their PhDs. And I remember it had never been a dream of mine to do a doctorate degree, but I met so many people that for a moment you kind of think, oh, maybe am I supposed to be doing a doctorate degree now? Like this is the thing I'm supposed to do. But then I was also dating someone who was doing his PhD, my now husband. And I know that it's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. And I'm fine that I didn't continue it.
Yeah. But your brother's a writer. Now you're a writer. So was this ever like a childhood dream to become an author, Eliza, or?
No, it's a funny, I have two younger brothers. One is an engineer, so you'll also like that, Yrsa, because
I like that very much.
Professional background, exactly. And then my other little brother is a writer. We had a lot of books in my house growing up. My father's an English teacher. My mother also loves books, and so there's books all over. And I was a huge bookworm when I was growing up. I sort of, and especially crime fiction, Nancy Drew and every Agatha Christie under the sun, including the one under the sun. And so I read all the time, but I didn't have a particular ambition to be a writer. I wanted to be a lawyer because there was this Canadian legal drama on TV that was a sort of LA Law knockoff. Yeah. And I thought that looked really exotic. Then I went to university and I realized that to go to law school, you had to finish a degree and then go to law school. And I decided that I'm very pragmatic in my choices, So no, but I did some travel writing when I finished this big trip that Barbara mentioned earlier. And then I moved to Iceland and I'd done a lot of writing professionally, sort of marketing writing. And then when I was between jobs in Iceland, I started getting into more travel writing, especially, but also profile writing and journalism. And I really enjoyed that and really kind of found a niche there. And then, I didn't necessarily have an ambition to write a book specifically, but just because I had this idea, I thought, this is the book. I'll do this one.
Yeah, it is. And it just has there was an empty, space in all bookshelves waiting for that book. I think, truly, I think it's, and I'm actually just in awe that nobody ever wrote that book before. It's such a, it's so so I urge, people, and I mean, you have even on the front page, I mean, you have a recommendation, or what do you call it, like a blurb from Hillary Clinton. I mean, so I mean, it's not just me that likes the book.
I was pretty excited by that. I will confess. Yeah.
Everybody I've met that's read it.
Ursula, if I could just interject, I actually compiled a little note here of people who have recommended the book. And it's such a wide variety of people that I think it's worth noting. Ruth Reichel, for example, who Comfort Me with Apples is one of my all-time favorite memoirs. She's, editor of Gourmet, well known for cooking and travel writing. She's an enthusiastic fan of this book. Then we have Hillary Clinton, as you've already mentioned. Geraldine Brooks, who's a wonderful author, Pulitzer Prize winner, calls it a warm and intimate exploration of what one small country can teach the world about gender equality. And then we have Cheryl Strayed, who, again, I think the travel comes in. But I think that's a very interesting group of people from diverse backgrounds and writing, because Hillary Clinton has actually written a crime novel, as you probably noticed. To all of them embrace the book. But it seems to me that that is the outsider perspective. You mentioned several times being an immigrant into Iceland. You took the trouble to learn Icelandic, which, would be certainly some amount of work. And I do think the outsider perspective is very good in crime fiction, to write about a community and so forth. Probably makes it possible for you to have written this book in a way that someone native to Iceland might not have been able to do. Is that what you're saying, Yrsa? I think it is in part.
Yeah. I mean, there are many, points that you raise, Eliza, that I was like, oh, is that even a thing? I wouldn't even have realized that was, something that was worth mentioning, So yeah. But that being said, I think that you are, Eliza, as much Icelandic as you are Canadian in a way now. You've lived there for 20 years, so you do still have the eye of the guest, but also you're well enough ingrained into society to be able to navigate around it like it's just exactly the same as I would. So that also helps. So it's not everybody could have written this and seen this somehow. So that's really really nice. I wanted to ask you, I mean, I think in Iceland, nobody sees you as being the president's wife as if that is all of who you are. I mean, that's not the way things work there. And I think also, you made a name for yourself totally aside from this president thing. So, for example, like the Iceland Writers Retreat, how many years has that been going on now?
We started in 2014 was our first event.
2014.
It's about the same as Iceland Noir, I guess, right? And,
but
we've done it every year. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's your baby. And you made that into something like it's a fixture in the cultural calendar in Iceland. And maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that for those that don't know it.
Yeah, it's and I think, Yrsa, you can probably agree with this. Iceland is such a book-loving nation overall, and Reykjavik is the world's first non-native English-speaking UNESCO city of literature. So this is a country and an environment that really respects writers very much. And my friend Erica Jacobs Green, who founded the retreat with me, went to a writers' conference in the US a number of years ago. She was living in Iceland at the time, and she came back full of ideas and excited to just work on some writing projects. And we were drinking wine one night, where all the best ideas come from. And I said, it's too bad that, or Erica said, it's a shame that there's nothing like that in Iceland, because everybody loves to read and write in Iceland. And I said, yeah, that's true. Like, why don't we just do that? And, this is one of the wonderful things is that, we put together a business plan and an idea of the sort of marketing groups that we were aiming for, and started to meet with potential sponsors and organizations. And nobody said, well, how many writers' retreats have you run before? they just asked, they just listened to our plan and our proposal, and they said yes or no. And everybody took us very seriously. And it's been a really fun project sometimes. So we bring over, it's for anybody who likes to write. Nobody has to audition or be a full-time writer or however they define it. And we bring over writers from around the world, and also Icelandic writers, like Yrsa, for example, is teaching workshops this year in April. And these writers teach small group workshops, so between 5 and 15 people each, on the craft of writing. And the participants, who come from all over the world as well, they take 5 of these writing workshops, and then they learn about Iceland's literary heritage. So we have a full day tour that is led by a writer that has extra reading stops, but also goes into Icelandic nature. And we have a pub night with readings by local authors and music by local musicians. And we have receptions, and we have a walking tour of Reykjavik and a reading and a Q&A panel. So sometimes calling it a retreat is a bit of a misnomer, because it's quite a social event, really, for people who want to be social. But we thought calling it a conference was also very sterile. So we call it a retreat. And this year as well, we're launching an event called the Iceland Readers Retreat, which is concurrent. So anybody who likes to read but doesn't want to write comes and takes part in all of the non-workshop events. And then when the writing workshops are taking place, they go to extra panels by Icelandic authors and an extra tour, and they see the Icelandic sagas. So we have a big
nice.
program lined up.
Yeah, because readers and writers, they have so much in common. So that's really nice to be able to, yeah. And you must have been a reader as a child. Yeah, you were mentioning it. Yeah, Nancy Drew and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I read a lot of crime and nonfiction. I love nonfiction.
Yeah. But I mean, how many people do you have any idea of like the number of people that have attended the Writers Retreat through the years?
Yeah, we get our very first year, our goal was to get 50 participants, and we had 52. And then we've grown sort of since then, but we never want to be huge.
Yeah.
I think the largest year we ever had was 110. And then we have always local volunteers. We have some people bring their partners with them, and then there's the faculty. So the group is bigger, but I hope it kind of feels small and friendly, because the classes are always very small and we rotate. So there's one group one day who's doing workshops, and then another group's on a tour or something. So it's really only at our big welcome dinner when the whole group comes together.
Yeah. No, it'll probably be now that it's going to be in the spring, and 2 years? It was for 2 times. Yeah, 2 times. And
yeah, we had it virtually. We did do it last year, but we did it digitally. And we just wrote to all like our former faculty and asked any of them if they were willing to do a Zoom workshop. And so we offered a whole, I can't remember now, 40 different workshops over 3 days. And then people could access them for a month afterwards. Yeah. And so it went pretty well, but we're really excited to go back to in-person.
I can imagine. Yes. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So one of my favorite stories, Eliza, that you told me once when we were together in Spain, I think in Barcelona, it was the story
right before we couldn't travel anymore.
Yeah, and then just COVID hit, and that was it. But you told me a story about when you and Guðni and your son went to when Iceland was competing in the European Cup, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a wonderful story. Mm-hmm. Do you think you would want to share that with the people who are listening?
I'm happy to do that. And this is also exclusive bonus content, I would say, because this story is not in the book. No. Although it's a good story. And it just has to relate to this idea of how my and our lives changed, in a sense, after my husband was elected president. So the election was in late June 2016, and the election was on a Saturday. And on Sunday evening, the day after he became president-elect, but obviously he didn't take office immediately, we had tickets to fly to Nice in France because the Icelandic men's soccer team was competing in the European Cup, and they were playing England in the playoff round. And it's fair to say that Iceland was David to England's Goliath. But we had these tickets, and our son at the time was 8 years old. And so we were flying down to Nice. But all of a sudden, of course, my husband was president-elect. And so the airline upgraded us to business class, and they had rented an airplane that had fully flat business seats. So so my son was, playing with the seats as we were flying down and figuring out how the remote control worked. And then the plane landed. And of course, because of protocol in France and security issues, we had a motorcade because he was president-elect all of a sudden. And so there was a motorcade, a couple of police officers on motorcycles and a limo and another car right outside the airplane. And my son looked out the window and he said, "Do we have to pay for all this?" And I remember saying to him, okay, you're allowed to tell your friends, but you're not allowed to brag, and this might happen again, but you can't expect this will happen again. And so we get into this motorcade, and our friend who was traveling with us had just booked some, 3-star hotel on TripAdvisor, or whatever you book when you're on a budget trip. And this motorcade pulls up to whatever, generic hotel it was. And the owner came out and was saying, "Wait, what's going on?" And then we had to explain. And then they sent up champagne to our room. And I remember thinking, oh, this is how this goes. This is okay. But it was a very surreal weekend, because there was a lot of Iceland fans in Nice. And so they were coming up to us all the time, wanting to be in photos and take pictures. And then the best part of it is that Iceland beat England at the end of that match.
That was yes. Yeah. But this, this is a big change, obviously, to your life, and maybe to those listening, I want to mention that the book is full of stories like this, like personal, funny stories, the earring. Lots of personal stories that make it such a great read, and yeah. But this must have been a huge change. Not only now you have to live, in another house, it's a big change to become, even though when we had Iceland Noir last November, you were kind enough to invite some of the writers over to the Bessastaðir, or the president's, what do you call it? President's house, president's
residence, yeah.
Residence. Yeah. And all of these authors were foreign authors, and they were just flabbergasted that there wasn't any security. Because I think that's also kind of a statement to the type of country Iceland is. Still, things might change, but that you can just drive up to the president's residence and knock on the door. And
there are police officers there, but yeah, you can drive up.
Yeah, but what is it? One hiding behind or something? Really
well, let me intervene and say that it used to be more informal here before 9/11. When we had our first National Book Festival, since I was at one point a librarian at the Library of Congress and helped organize it, we had our breakfast for that first group of authors, which met the weekend of 9/11. We ended it on September 10th. And we all went to the White House for breakfast. And, it was very informal. I still have photos of Nevada Bar and Harlan Coben and myself, lolling about in the yellow room or the green room or something. You can't imagine just how everything changed when that happened. And we've never moved past it in terms of security. So, it is unusual that it would be so informal, I think, anywhere, but in this country, it really did change a lot. So I wonder if you could help me remember something. My first trip to Iceland was everybody was amazed in 1989 that a cruise ship, a small one, that left Hamburg could go to Reykjavik and then travel north around the northern part of Ireland. Apparently up to that moment, it was never really safe with the ice and all, and so everybody went south. So we did that. The second time I went, and I think we were in Eastern Ireland near maybe Seyðisfjörður. I probably can't pronounce it right, but we took a trip to visit the home of an iconic Icelandic writer, might be the Nobel laureate, Mr. Laxness, or what, I don't know how to pronounce it. And it was a sod house. And I still remember how impressed we all were at this beautiful home with the sod roof, which I grew up in Chicago, but I haven't seen a sod house ever in my entire life. And so here I was admiring it in Iceland. So who were some of your older iconic writers like him, rather than the current group like Ragnar Jonasson and, Yrsa? Arnold, I can't pronounce the names. I'm so apologetic here, but Indridason, is that his name?
That's very good.
Right.
There are Yrsa, you can also should alter into this too. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the house, though. It's one of the things I like to mention when I talk about Icelandic literature overall, that, you can buy a book here that is a book of all of the homes of writers that have been turned into museums. I mean, you could drive around the country and stop at museums all around the way that are homes commemorating the works of various authors. I think they're almost all, if not all, male authors. So we need to work maybe on that a bit. But that is something that shows in tiny communities, this is a profession that is revered. Yrsa, as you say, Laxness, I think, inspires writers today as well. And there's lots of exciting literature coming out of Iceland.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're talking about the ones from way before, that's mainly men, and very, very, very little of that has been translated to English. So I think that we don't need to discuss that much. But we have many, really interesting new authors, and a lot of them are female, which is also, I think, is quite nice that we have all of these young voices, female authors coming up, like up and coming authors that show such promise, that I'm certain, without any doubt, that there will be lots and lots of them being translated into English soon, if it's not already underway.
I'm doing an event in Washington, D.C. next month with Þóra Hjörleifsdóttir, who wrote a book called Magma, which Oprah Winfrey recommended as one of her, not like a book of the month, but in a list of a number of translated books. And there's a new book that came out before Christmas by a poet and writer for his book called Frida Ísberg. It's called Merking in Icelandic. I forget the English word, and it's already been sold into 17 or 18 languages, I think, including English. So, and these are women, under the age of 30, are coming up. And then, in the crime fiction genre, which is such a major genre, there's Eva Björk, as you're saying, who Yrsa and Ragnar are sponsoring a wonderful and important prize in Iceland for writers of their first crime fiction novel. And part of that prize is, the book comes out in Icelandic, but they also get a contract with an English agent. And that's really helped. And then they've had their works translated into English, including Eva Björk, who's doing really well. Yeah,
I would recommend people, if for crime fiction fans, and for the bookshop, I would recommend you carry her. She's very, very good. Creek on the Stairs is her first novel. And she's highly recommended, really, really good. So we have and it's nice. And then we also have like Auður Ava, who's a little bit older than Svikaskald, or the group of young women poets who include the writers you mentioned, Frida and so it's Camilla and Auður Jóns, who is, I think, presently one of her books just got published in America. I think she's going to New York to do some readings, and she is the grandchild of Laxness. So it seems that because Auður's books are fantastic, and so there's some literary gene in that family. So and I would also recommend reading that book. I'm not sure which it is. I'm not sure which one it is.
I can't remember, but I think it's Dottir. I think it's Dottir Press, Dottir, like the Icelandic word daughter, that's publishing it in the States, if I recall correctly. Because Auður, who is very prolific in Icelandic, that I think it may be her first book in English that's been published.
I think so.
But I could be.
Well, I will pick Yrsa's brain. That'll be wonderful to look it up. I should give a shout out to Icelandic Air, but before the pandemic, they had a wonderful program where you could fly to Iceland and you could deplane and tour Iceland for, I think you had up to 10 days, if I remember correctly, before you had to reboard and go on to some other destination. So it's a glorious country to visit. And I would recommend, rather than reading Icelandic authors in the United States, it'd be way better to go from the United States to Iceland. If I remember right, Reykjavik years ago when we first went there was thought to have the highest literacy rate of any city in the world.
Quite possible. Iceland has one of the highest literacy rates overall as a country in the world, and certainly per capita one of the highest. Book buying and book publishing rates per capita. Everything per capita.
To read. Well, which is also a huge benefit, right? Why don't we see if Patrick has, unless Yrsa, I apologize, I should have said, is there anything else pressing you'd like to ask, or would you like Patrick to see your questions?
Maybe if I could just one thing, so because I feel I haven't gone well enough into like the theme of the book, Eliza, which is that, I mean, Iceland is according to, the global, the gender bias index.
World Economic Forum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gender gap index.
Yeah, gender gap index. It's the best place that tops that, and has done that for what, 14 years in a row or whatever. But still, we only get 86 to a man's 100. So I mean, even though it is the best place, of course, obviously there are it's not perfect, and you point that out in the book that there are still some ways to go, and if there was any one thing that you could change, with regards to gender issues in Iceland, what would you? Is there anything that pops to mind? You don't have to, if you don't.
Can I
have
say
it.
3 things?
Yes, you can say.
I'm going to say 3 things. Okay.
Yes,
okay. I'll say them shortly. And they're not in priority order. They're just 3 things together. One is to not leave groups behind, like say immigrant women, which is a huge group that I look at, and it's an increasing group. So not working towards immigrant women, women of foreign origin.
Yes.
Or queer women or women with disabilities, or any, the point being that we can't move to equality with one exclusive group, that we need to remember everybody. And I guess I see a lot because I'm an immigrant and know that there's challenges. Secondly, I would say women in the C-suite and corporate Iceland, that even though we have quotas for boards and laws on equal pay for equal work, we're not moving fast enough towards gender parity in terms of women running companies and in terms of investment that we're seeing, who is controlling the investment, and for entrepreneurs, companies, and initiatives that are being run by women. And thirdly, I would say reducing gender-based violence, because gender-based violence is a challenge and an issue around the world. It continues to be in Iceland. It's there. There's, we have high reporting rates of it. But a very low percentage of cases actually result in convictions and go through to trial. And that's something that we need to work on, or we're never going to get where we want to go. Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with the corporate thing, like the finance industry, I remember in the crash, it became so evident that how the glass ceiling in the banks, because all of the crooks, or the people that were taken to trial for being dishonest in the banks or whatever they were doing, there wasn't any women. And it wasn't because women are of a higher moral standard or anything. It was just that they never rose to the level of being able to be dishonest. To be that corrupt. Yeah. But then they were running the banks afterwards to clean it all up. That's the look, right? So it's but I agree with the 3 things. I would also like that to especially because I think for the American listeners, it's good to know that most of the investment taking place in Iceland is through the pension funds. The pension funds have all the money, of all the pensioners in Iceland, and those pension funds obviously are owned just as much by women and men. So it's really weird that they put usually the money into companies run by men more than they do for women. That's creepy, I think. Yeah, it's only, I think it's 13% of the people who are actually deciding and giving out the money are women, and it's 80% who are not actually companies that are just run by men. Yeah, and there was a very, very stark figure about startups, that the pension funds have money to put into startups, and I think it was just so incredibly low, the rate of startups that had just women on board. Yes. Yeah. Compared to, it's like 5% or something. Most of the money went to startups that only had men on board, and that's just that doesn't fly. And we need to encourage more women to be doing startups. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But if they don't get the money, then the encouragement has to come. It has to happen like simultaneously in a way. Yeah, I agree.
Could I ask how well structured is childcare in Iceland? It's, if mothers have to make oftentimes difficult choices about, raising children versus working, does Iceland have a wonderful safety net for childcare?
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. There's excellent parental leave policies for both parents, and very subsidized childcare. So I feel that there's much, I say this sort of anecdotally, but much less of a pressure of choosing one or the other. Or, if you're committed to your career, you're not committed to your family, or vice versa. I really think that if there's any kind of stigma surrounding women and family versus work, the stigma is almost for women who choose to stay at home. I don't actually really know people like that, but there's more judgment, I would think, of a young parent. So, oh wait, sorry, you didn't go back to work. Why didn't you go back to work? And I think it should, obviously there should be choice for people, but I think if there's a stigma, it's more in that direction than the other direction.
And what about higher education as well? I mean, I realize that I could have looked all this up, but it's easier and probably more important to ask you anyway. What are the educational opportunities for women? Are they equal?
Women make up 2/3 of the undergraduate students at the University of Iceland right now, which is the largest university in the country. So if anything, when it comes to university education, people are saying, why aren't boys going more to universities now? I don't know how it is in technical schools or trade schools. It might be more even, certainly to be a shipping captain, that's, far more men than women. But right now at the universities, it's more women than men. And the question is that going to, do we see that being translated into, say, managerial positions going down the line, women in leadership positions throughout society? And that remains to be seen. Do you want to add anything, Yrsa?
No, I agree. I tried to get my daughter to study to be a captain. I told her, there are no women there. Don't you find that interesting? It would be interesting to be a female sea captain. She wouldn't hear of it. But she's now studying robotics, and I'm very happy because I think we're entering a new world where a lot of stuff will be on autopilot, just with AI, and I think if we're not going to get entrenched exactly where we are now, we need the programmers and the robot engineers and so on to also be female, so that you have both viewpoints when making the software and making the decisions that will be made for us more and more and more increasingly in the future. So I'm quite happy that you didn't go to sea and heard robotics.
But I think, conversely, and I agree with that, and I agree with it, especially because of how you describe, the viewpoints that are going into designing this. But I think conversely, that's why we need to see men teaching in the preschools, and men teaching in the elementary schools, and men working as nurses in these very sort of traditional female professions, because until we see more of that, our default as a society is this assumption that the caregiving roles are the women's responsibility. Yeah. And, my sons, I remember, I have 3 sons, and sometimes they say to me, how come I never have a male teacher? Or, their male teachers are their phys ed teachers or the principal of the school. And for boys growing up, I think, preschool boys and all that, it's so important for them to see men in those roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, to take this one step further, since I asked you about education and childcare, what about elder care? Because that's another caregiving role most often assigned to women. What opportunities are there if you're caring for older or ill members of your family to either have outside help or have men share in it?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a good support system. There's waiting lists. I think if there's a stereotype of caregiver in Iceland with elderly homes, it would be immigrants. It's a large majority. I don't know if it's a majority, but a lot of people of immigrant backgrounds are working there. But I think it's an area that because like Iceland has other countries has an aging population, and there are waiting lists for elderly care homes. I'm patron of the Alzheimer's Society, for instance. So I visited a lot of the day homes that they have for people visiting for Alzheimer's or dementia patients and their caregivers. And there's always kind of a waiting list. There's always more people who need those services. Absolutely. I'm not sure of the gender breakdown in terms of people in that field. Yrsa, do you?
No, I would think I would think it's more females working in helping the elderly. I would think so. But when it comes to like nursing is there are more women in nursing than there are men. And also the people like working in the old people's homes would tend to be more female. And I mean, I think a lot is being done in Iceland to try to make people have the opportunity to live at home as long as they can. Maybe because there's so much lacking space in care homes. But, and I think the people that come into homes to help elderly people be able to live there, I think those are usually women. And I think that maybe it's because, I don't know if it's because it's a low paying job or what it is, but maybe this old generation might find it also very uncomfortable to get like a man. I don't know. I don't know if that has something to do with it, but it's like so we get back on the robots, that robots always talk like a woman. They're Alexa and whatever, they're women voices. You don't want Arnold Schwarzenegger speaking to you, from your living room. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Well, these are all just places where women's lives can be derailed by, family and personal, not derailed, their working lives can be by family and personal obligations. And, how true that is. We have an aging population. These questions come up more and more. I find myself, now that I've turned 80, actually 81, much more cognizant of that and, the kinds of choices that you get to make and the choices that you get to make personally when you're aging. What is it that you want? How do I want to stay home? If my husband dies, do I want to be somewhere else? What do I want my children to do and all? And these are tough issues for people to talk about. People don't even like to draw wills, let alone talk about their, aging plans. But if we're going to have a really good safety net for everybody, we have to think about beginning of life, but also end of life issues. And also, I do think that the conversations that you've had with people really open the door. This is a remarkable book. And I forgot to mention, so I'm going to call Patrick up, that we do have signed book plates. So thank you very much for providing those. We couldn't actually float them over to Iceland and back, but it is nice to have that personal touch. So many thanks to you and to your publisher, Source Books, for making those possible. Sorry. Patrick, do you want to pop in and see if we have any questions or anything?
Sure. Yeah. So are you prepared for the wave of Americans seeking political asylum in Iceland now?
Is that your question, or is that like a question?
Well, how difficult is it to do that?
It's if you have a passport from the European Economic Area, then you can come here and get a job. But otherwise, you need to be skilled in an area that is needing work. But we love tourists.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Okay, I do have some questions. Betty would like to know. She says English is taught as a second language in Iceland. But was it difficult learning Icelandic? And is your book also available in Icelandic and other languages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my book actually came out in Icelandic translation before it came out in English, which is unusual for the translation to come out first. But many of the books are sold in Iceland in the period leading up to Christmas time. And so the publishers really wanted to have it part of that, what we call the Christmas book flood. So it came out in Icelandic in November in translation, and the rights have also been sold in German and French and Korean, and then hopefully in other languages. And I think that those books should be coming out, I think Korean first, and then German and French in the next year. And learning Icelandic. I'm often asked how long it took me to learn Icelandic in the past tense. So as if I woke up, in the morning and thought, okay, I'm ticking that box. I'm finished learning the language. And it is very much a work in progress all the time. And having children helps with that, because you are doing all kinds of different things help. So when my husband ran for president, I learned all kinds of new words about political campaigning that I didn't know before. And when my children started preschool, I learned the Icelandic words for dinosaur and snot, because it's surprising how often you need to use those words when you have small children and how rarely you use them otherwise. So it's an ongoing process, but I tried very hard at the beginning to learn the language and then to use it. And I think maybe the biggest challenge is the fact that people with Icelandic as a first language speak English generally very well. And so you could live in the country and never learn a word of Icelandic. So when you have English as your first language, you really, when you get to a point where you can have stilted and simple conversations, you have to really make a point of doing that, even though you know if you just switch to English, it would be much more straightforward. But you kind of have to work through that phase, because otherwise, you never get to the next one. But that was the hardest period, I thought, when I could say, oh, nice weather. Are you tired? Good food, and not really much more. And then everybody else could say more that you just really want to switch to English, but then you can't.
So I have a cat here who would like to know what is life like for cats and other animals in Iceland?
Oh, wow. The cat actually meowed. I should have brought my cat. We have a cat here somewhere as well. And our cat, at least, is happy as a clam in the presidential residence. She feels like she gets photographed a lot by tourists because we let her run around outside a lot. There's more of a tradition of cats here than dogs. Dogs are now quite trendy. Yrsa can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that dogs are always seen as working animals. So to be on a farm and help with the sheep. And it was actually, I think, at first illegal or very, very high cost to have a license for a dog in the city. And either that's been lowered or not. But now dogs, I think, are very trendy, but it's quite a new phenomenon. Would you agree, Yrsa?
Yeah. I mean, dogs were illegal. You were not allowed to keep a dog in Reykjavik until, I don't know, mid 80s or something. And because they were considered to be animals that would never be happy in a city, in an urban environment, that they needed to be in the countryside. And I think it's maybe changing now, but there is always this, that Iceland doesn't have a tradition of having pets, like animals as pets. So there are also towns in Iceland that have banned cats going outside, and so there's like a weird relationship with pets, but it's all moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I was just kind of being facetious. Very interesting answers to those questions. Let me see here. Jane wants to know, Yrsa, do you still have your Darth Vader shoes?
Oh yeah, I do. Yes. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what those are?
Yeah.
They have like the heel is like the Darth Vader helmet head, the heel of the shoe. So it's like a high heel shoe with where your Darth Vader is underneath the heel, or instead of a heel, you have a Darth Vader head. They look cool. Really nice. I'm not selling you this, but they do look nice.
Well, Kathy, who's watching, has made a couple of interesting points. Maybe you both can confirm this. She says, I heard that in 2008 in Iceland, the crooked bankers were jailed and their victims were bailed out, unlike in the USA. And the one bank that performed honestly was female run. Is that true?
I think it's an oversimplification.
Sounds good.
There were bankers who were convicted of offenses and were sent to some prisons. But I think it's kind of a misnomer to say that everybody was punished for what happened. And I think it's a bit along the lines of saying, that Iceland is a gender paradise. There's a lot of good things, but it's not a paradise. And people, it was a reckoning for sure, the financial crisis, and there was a lot of soul searching, and people were, some people were brought to task, but depends on who you speak to, whether they would say too many or not enough, I guess.
Right. Betty would like to know, she says, how are some of the social provisions paid for in Iceland? Is it through taxation or?
Our taxes.
Yep.
Our Nordic level of taxes. And that's just the social contract, I guess you'd say, that exists in Nordic countries and in Canada, and places where income taxes are high because they go into the big pot that pays for our healthcare and social programs and all kinds of things that are designed to level the playing field for everyone.
Are you? I'm sure.
Yeah.
Maybe if I could add a little bit about the taxes, that we are small enough and lucky enough that we don't have an army, so we don't have military expenses. So the taxes can be spent on other things. I'm not saying I fully understand that this can't be for every country, but for Iceland it works, and that even though we're paying high taxes, then we also it's spent on other things than military and weapons. So we can use that for cultural things, for example.
There's for instance, there's grants that the government pays for that go to authors and other creative professionals. So if you are, for instance, a poet, you can actually earn a salary from the government. It's very competitive to get these, but there are grants that go to poets, writers, musician, composers, and artists. And sometimes it's debated who got what grants or not, maybe how much, but you don't really see any debate about the existence of this program at all.
Barbara, I think we're getting towards the end of the hour, and that's just about all the questions I'm seeing coming in.
Can I say something just at the end? That I really urge everyone to read the book, just because it shows, it shows in such a really entertaining way what life can be like and how everybody benefits, not just women, everybody benefits. So
Very true. This has actually been, you might have, if you've been to our website this week, it is our quote hot book of the week, which is just our way of saying that I know that it's a book we highlight. And, I thought it was wonderful. And thank you both for letting us do this. It was wonderful since we have a tendency to focus on fiction. That it was wonderful to have an opportunity to display a book that we'd like everybody to read that, is something different. I also would like to commend the cover because I think it's very dramatic and, it displays well. We can't show the signed book plates on the website, but nonetheless, there we are. So, it's really been a great pleasure. It was a tremendous treat to read it. I agree with Yrsa that I think everybody should. And even if you're thinking that the pandemic means you can't go anywhere, one of the great advantages of books is that you can travel. You can travel in your head. For Eliza, having recounted her amazing voyage before she married, I would say that being locked down must be difficult. So we are probably we're going to Tahiti, my husband and I, for no other reason that we like the little sailing yacht that we're going on, which we have done before. And also it's a direct flight from San Francisco. We don't have to navigate Heathrow. But, it's a decision we probably only would have made because we've been locked down here for 2 years in the pandemic, but with luck, we can all start moving again. And I really recommend Iceland as a place to visit, in addition to a wonderful place to read about. So,
there's
if
one.
you like,
I was just going to say, there's one obvious question that comes to mind, which is, Yrsa and Eliza, would you consider collaborating on a crime novel?
There's other people collaborate. When I grow up, I want to write a crime novel. So we'll see what happens.
Sorry for interrupting.
You may have an opportunity to encounter plots in your present job that would not have come to you in the ordinary way. So
Yrsa is, known as the queen of crime in Iceland, and so very respected and revered here, not only for the quality of her books, but also for being so supportive of new writers like Eva Björk and this wonderful grant that they offer, and just the way that she is so encouraging of everybody else coming up. So I admire that a lot.
She is wonderful. Karen Slaughter, who's a very well-known crime writer, is a big admirer of Yrsa and urged us last year to do a conversation just for fun with Karen and Yrsa. And Patrick and I were absolutely astonished when we looked at the figures to realize that there were maybe like 20 Americans and 8,000 people from other countries that watched that program. It was just amazing, Yrsa, to see. And a huge percentage of that was in Scotland. So, it gave us a kind of demographic for you that we wouldn't have had a chance to ever encounter had it not been for that program. But I
think actually, if I wasn't Icelandic, I would be Scottish. So that does not surprise me. There's some affinity that I feel with Scottish, Scotland, everything about Scotland feels to
Well, they
me.
clearly love you.
Here.
And you know, that's the great thing about Zoom. We would, in the ordinary way, never have had this conversation live and in person in Scottsdale. I mean, the logistics of it. And we've been very pleased doing Zooms that we have questions from Zimbabwe and Auckland. And we had our first question from Mongolia in a
That's
recent
right.
interview. And, you know, I really love that despite the downside of the pandemic, that because of it and that we're all at home and using Zoom and forth, we've had chances to connect in ways that would never have occurred to us. So I'm really
It's that irony that being being far away has somehow brought us closer together in some senses.
Really true. And we're going to keep this technology, even as we're merging back towards more live events and so forth. We actually video and stream all of our conversations. And so I love that we can embrace it. Anyway, thank you for your time and your very busy schedule. And lovely to see you, Yrsa. I know you have a new book coming out, so we'll talk about that. And enjoy.
Thank you
Great.
for
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.